In regards to the illegal and shameful robo-debt scheme that affected about 500,000 Australians and drove two people to take their own life, Minister for the National Disability and Insurance Scheme, Bill Shorten, said, "Governments are meant to be there to help people, not hurt people." When he was the Minister of Superannuation and Financial Services in charge of the Trio Capital investigation, his misleading and discrediting statements hurt the Trio victims. Over 6,000 Australians in Trio products had retirement savings stolen. 5,000 of the Trio victims received compensation and 1,000 didn't. From this 1,000, 2 lives were lost to suicide. Statistically, that makes the Trio fraud 500 times more dangerous compared to robo-debt. Robo-Debt Royal Commission vindicated the victims by finding robo-debt was a crude and cruel mechanism, neither fair nor legal, and it made many people feel like criminals. In essence, people were traumatised on the off chance they might owe money. It was a costly failure of public administration in both human and economic terms. The Trio inquiry could not vindicate the Trio victims, as the Australian Securities and Investment Commission withheld important evidence from the Parliamentary Joint Committee, of which some parroted Mr. Shorten's discrediting statements. Mr. Shorten was crude and cruel to make honest, hard-working Australians feel like criminals. ASIC and Mr. Shorten showed no respect for the Charter of Victims' Rights as contained in the Victims' Rights and Support Act 2013. ASIC and Mr. Shorten did not respect the victims' rights and dignity. They denied the legal rights of victims of crime in the same way they interfered with the process of the law by politicising the Trio crime. Mr. Shorten's own agenda was more important than acknowledging that consumers and financial advisors did carry out proper due diligence. The Trio consumers met a wall of resistance when they tried to inform the government of the lies and cover-ups surrounding the Trio fraud. Neither ASIC or the Australian Prudential Regulations Authority acknowledged the 2 suicides driven by the Trio fraud. Was a bureaucratic indifference found in robo-debt present in the handling of the Trio fraud? The Trio scheme was not dangerous. The Star Strategic Fund under Trio Capital commenced operating in late 2004 and operated for 5 years. APRA carried out prudential reviews, while ASIC issued the Australian Financial Services Licence. The Star Strategic Fund complied with the corporation's law, and the law firm Baker McKenzie prepared the product disclosure statement. Morningstar and Van Mack research houses listed it as low risk and gave favourable reports. The Star Strategic Fund was awarded 4 and 5 stars out of 5. The custodians were the National Australian Bank and the Australian and New Zealand Banking Group Limited. The auditors were KPMG and WHK. The gatekeepers approved of the Trio scheme. Trio became dangerous when Mr. Shorten and ASIC made a distinction without a difference and blamed a specific group of consumers and financial advisors for the loss of retirement savings. The evidence that the government ignored will be presented in a short videos by the Trio victims. This video looks at some of the information that was available to ASIC 3 years before the Trio scheme started operating in the Australian financial market. ASIC held evidence of the people that later became owners and operators of the Trio scheme. ASIC had access to information from its overseas counterparts that the public don't get to see, such as warnings about people operating unlicensed companies and or boiler room scams. In the case of the Philippines-based boiler room scam called Millennium Financial, ASIC had published an alert about Millennium in 2002. Therefore, can ASIC use the excuse about registering so many companies and being impossible to check the entities behind each and every company? That same Millennium Company is mentioned in 2002 warning from the United States Securities Exchange Commission and by the New Zealand Securities Commission in 2001 and 2002. Would ASIC pass the Australian pub test? Did it pay attention to its own warnings? Did it take an interest in its counterpart warnings? The first important landmark is the registration by ASIC in 2001 of the Right Global Investment Company. The document held on ASIC's database of that registration has the names of Vietnamese-American Matthew Lidier, British citizen Frank Richard Bell, and Canadian citizen Sean Richard. They were all appointed to the Right Global Investment Company on the same day in 2001. The document also mentions Astral Investments Limited as a member. Trio commenced operating in late 2004, and the information from 2001 to 2003 is significant. The Astral Investment Limited document dated 2003 and called Notifications of Changes of Secretary and Directors was held by the Hong Kong Company Registration Office. The document names Matthew Lidier and the signatory is Zetland Securities Limited. Zetland is a Hong Kong company owned and operated by American lawyer Jack Flatter and his business partner, Scottish accountant James Sutherland. Unrelated to ASIC-held documents is the journey by ASIC to Hong Kong. In 2002, ASIC teamed up with the Australian Tax Office, the Australian Federal Police, and the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions. They travelled to Hong Kong to subpoena 100,000 documents from the Zetland office of Flatter and Sutherland. The subpoenaed documents became evidence used in the Queensland court case Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions versus Stephen Hart. The case concerned money stolen from the Australian Tax Office, and the charge was fraud against the Commonwealth of Australia. Evidently, after the Zetland documents helped in the sentencing of Stephen Hart, ASIC did not check its own database to see if Flatter and Sutherland were preparing to enter the Australian financial market. The New Zealand Securities Commission's warning 2001 and 2002 about Millennium Financial selling dud stock supported ASIC's published warning. However, the New Zealand Securities Commission went one step further. It listed the names of 17 of the people operating Millennium, and Sean Richard's name was on the list. Sean Richard was the perpetrator and the only person jailed for the trio fraud. But when Australia published the news in September 2009 about the trio being a possible fraud, Mr. Richard's name was removed from the Commission's website. A Sydney Morning Herald journalist tried to find out why the Securities Commission removed Richard's name, but it could not provide a reason. Throughout 2002 and 2003, ASIC's counterparts in the United States, Netherlands, Isle of Man, Austria, New Zealand and Hong Kong all posted warnings about unlicensed companies. Europe warned of the unlicensed New World Financial, a company owned and operated by Matthew Lidier. The United States Securities and Exchange Commission filed in May 2002 its civil action case against the international boiler room Millennium Financial. Had someone shown ASIC the connection between the International Regulatory Authority's warnings and the information ASIC had on its own database, would ASIC have acted without the evidence of a crime? If someone had pointed out to ASIC that Frank Richard Bell was barred in the United States from working in the financial service industry, yet he remained active as a part of the team operating the TRIO scheme, would have that concerned ASIC? Had ASIC taken the safety and security of the retirement savings of hard-working, honest Australians seriously, then the above information could have helped nip the trio fraud in the bud well before it destroyed people's lives. It is one thing for ASIC to be reluctant to act against misconduct, but to deny natural justice to the trio victims because ASIC's and Mr. Shorten's own agenda wanted to politicise the trio crime is an indifference at an entire another level. The politicising of the trio crime was a kick in the guts to the trio victims that were already down by the fraud. The next video will look at further evidence and unresolved issues.